everybody, we're going to be reading chapter 3 of Out of My Mind. So I need you to go ahead and open up your book to page 13. Should look like this. And I'm really excited because I'm making an inference. On chapter 3, it says, my father finds the island. I'm so pumped. I can't wait for him to get to the island and for him to describe what it's like because, like we talked about, this map is based on her father's representation of what the island was like. We know this because it says my father doesn't know what's on this side of the island. So this is all left blank because we don't know anything about it. So I wonder if he'll talk about all the different things that we see on this island on this map. So let's dive in and hopefully we get to hear about what Wild Island is like. Chapter 3. I want you following along with every word I say. My father finds the island. My father hid in the hold for 6 days and nights. Twice he was nearly caught when the ship stopped to take on more cargo. But at last he heard a sailor say that the next port would be Cranberry and that they'd be unloading the wheat there. My father knew that the sailors would send him home if they caught him. So he looked in the knapsack and took out a rubber band and the empty grain bag with the label saying Cranberry. At the last moment, my father got inside the bag, knapsack and all, folded the top of the bag inside, and put the rubber band around the top. He didn't look just exactly like the other bags, but it was the best he could do. Soon the sailors came to unload. They lowered a big net into the hold and began moving the bags of wheat. Suddenly, one sailor yelled, "Great Scott! This is the queerest bag of wheat I've ever seen. It's all lumpy-like, but the label says it's to go to Cranberry." The other sailors looked at the bag too, and my father, who was in the bag, of course, tried even harder to look like a bag of wheat. Then another sailor felt the bag, and he had just happened to get a hold of my father's elbow. "I know what this is," he said. "This is a bag of dried corn on the cob." And he dumped my father into the big net along with the bag of wheats. This all happened in the late afternoon, so late that the merchant in Cranberry who had ordered the wheat didn't count his bags until the next morning. He was a very punctual man and never late for dinner. The sailors told the captain, and the captain wrote down on a piece of paper that they had delivered 160 bags of wheat and 1 bag of dried corn on the cob. They left the pieces of paper for the merchant and sailed away that evening. My father heard later that the merchant spent the whole next day counting and recounting the bags and feeling each one trying to find the bag of dried corn on the cob. He never found it because as soon as it was dark, my father climbed out of the bag, folded it up, and put it back in his knapsack. He walked along the shore to a nice sandy place and lay down to sleep. My father was very hungry when he woke up the next morning. Just as he was looking to see if he had anything left to eat, something hit him on the head. It was a tangerine. He had been sleeping right under a tree full of big, fat tangerines. And then he remembered that this was the island of Tangerina. Tangerine trees grew wild everywhere. My father picked as many as he had room for, which was 31, and started off to find Wild Island. He walked and walked and walked along the shore, looking for the rocks that joined the two islands. He walked all day, and once he met a fisherman and asked about Wild Island, and the fisherman began to shake and couldn't talk for a long while. It scared him that much, just thinking about it. Finally, he said, "Many people have tried to explore Wild Island, but not one has come back alive. We think they were eaten by the wild animals." This didn't bother my father. He kept walking and slept on the beach again that night. It was beautifully clear the next day, and way down the shore my father could see a long line of rocks leading out into the ocean, and way out at the end, he could just see a tiny patch of green. He quickly ate 7 tangerines and started down the beach. It was almost dark when he came to the rocks, but there, way out in the ocean, was the patch of green. He sat down and rested a while, remembering that the cat had said, if you can go out to the island at night, because then the wild animals won't see you coming along the rocks, and you can hide when you get there. So my father picked 7 more tangerines, put on his black rubber boots, and waited for dark. It was a very black night, and my father could hardly see the rocks ahead of him. Sometimes they were quite high, and sometimes the waves almost covered them. And they were slippery and hard to walk on. Sometimes the rocks were far apart, and my father had to get a running start and leap from one to the next. After a while, he began to hear a rumbling noise. It grew louder and louder as he got nearer to the island. At last, it seemed as if he was right on top of the noise, and he was. He had jumped from a rock onto the back of a small whale who was fast asleep and cuddled up between two rocks. The whale was snoring and making more noise than a steam shovel, so it never heard my father say, "Oh, I didn't know that was you." And it never knew my father had jumped onto its back by mistake. For 7 hours, my father climbed and slipped and leaped from rock to rock. But while it was still dark, he finally reached the very last rock and stepped off onto Wild Island. And that is the end of chapter 3. I can't wait to find out in chapter 4 if he has more of an adventure on Wild Island.